Elise Loehnen combines religion and the patriarchy to discuss the perils that women face in modern American society. I discuss this and more on today's episode. Welcome back to Around the Weird, a booktube channel where I talk about all the unusual and out of the ordinary literature that I have found in my travels. And sometimes I talk about very normal literature, like you'll see today. But today's book is all about the patriarchy and how that affects women and religion and things like that. I am referring to On Our Best Behavior by Elise Loehnen, which is published in 2023. For those who don't know, Elise Loehnen is a white American writer who has written only one book. She's written a couple of articles and whatnot, but only one book, which is this book. Based on her experiences and her insight and some of the research that she's done. It should also be noted that Elise Loehnen is the co-founder of Goop, which is a sort of lifestyle brand that was created in collaboration with Gwyneth Paltrow, and it's supposedly talking about creating solutions for women in today's society, but a lot of people have noted that it's very classist, as a lot of people can't afford what Gwyneth Paltrow is often suggesting, and it's also sometimes unhealthy, that it could severely harm women with what Gwyneth Paltrow is talking about. And for Elise Loehnen to be the co-founder of this, that seems rather significant. But I will talk about that more in the analysis section and how that plays a role in this story. I don't know too much else about Elise, again, because this is the only thing that she's written. And I wonder if she's going to write anything else, but we will see. So without further ado, let's talk about this book. I will do a summary, a little bit of analysis, and we will move on from there. So On Our Best Behavior focuses on the combination of religion and the patriarchy. She talks about the rise of the patriarchy, how it was over time that it developed, because when she talks about how, like, when we were in sort of traveling or nomadic cultures, it was often led by women, although it wasn't matriarchal. And she notes that as we got closer together in societies and farming and all of that, systems of law were created in some cases that disadvantaged women or made them property. She talks about the rise of religion, especially the Christian religion. She seems to touch upon Judaism here. But my friend Bevan, this was actually a book that was recommended by her for our book club. She actually complained to me that Elise didn't appear to be doing her research about the Jewish religion. So it's not as controlling of women. But Christianity is, and you can see how as Christianity became more popular, women sort of lost their autonomy. You end up with witch hunts that meant to take power and autonomy away from women. And then you see the modern American society, which is patriarchal. And anytime a woman asks for rights, men complain and say, no, you can't have that. And so you end up with sort of a religious evangelical control of women. And she goes into talk about the sort of 7 deadly sins as they relate to women, but she talks about the original 8 or 9 sins that Evagrius Ponticus wrote when he was writing them in the 400s or 500s, way back when. She talks about sloth and how women sort of have never-ending work. There's the second shift where women are expected to do home duties, but when there's a lot of collaboration at home, things are better in a relationship. But women can't really ask for that because they're viewed as weak or less than if they're not able to raise their kids on their own. She also talks about envy and how women have to censor their wants and desires so as to not appear jealous or undercutting other women. And what's also interesting is how, like, the relationship between the mother and the daughter, as Loehnen talks about it, how mothers and daughters are viewed as sort of prisoners for their own sake, or like the daughter views themselves as their mother's greatest joy and their jailer, where their mom is really happy that they had the daughter, but at the same time, they see that they're restricting their mother from achieving greater things or things that they might have wanted to do in life. Loehnen also talks about pride and how we often require women to be modest because if they actually acknowledge what they've accomplished or talk about what they're capable of doing, we as a culture kind of criticize them for that. A good example is sort of Anne Hathaway talking about how she worked hard to get her Oscar and then the media immediately criticizing her for that and comparing her against Jennifer Lawrence. Loehnen encourages women to embrace their gifts. She talks about gluttony and fat phobia, diet culture, and how the wellness industry is not very helpful to women. She talks about greed and economic security, how women are encouraged to give it up in order to have a great relationship with their husband, but if they give up that economic security, they're often left on their own if something bad happens in that marriage. And she also talks about the pay gap that exists when women do enter the workforce. She talks about the sin of lust, how we live in a rape culture that does not listen to women. She specifically highlights the Me Too movement, but how Kavanaugh was kind of the Christine Blasey Ford, how her concerns were ignored when trying to highlight how Kavanaugh might have been a monster. Talking about not being able to relax during sex, her own experience and how that related back to her having been sexually assaulted at one time, not being able to really enjoy sex in that way. And then also slut-shaming women who do enjoy sex. She talks about anger and women holding back their righteous fury because, again, they're seen as less than or just angry, bitter women whenever they do let out some anger, and contrasting that against men who are allowed to be angry and are seen as righteous in that. She talks about sadness, which was later removed as a sin by the Christian church, but was originally added by Evagrius, and how we often as a society don't allow women to feel or don't let men to feel especially. She notes that it's important to let men be sad, to experience that, otherwise you become enmeshed in toxic masculinity. Then she also highlights the Gospel of Mary, a book that is considered non-canon among Catholics, but in the Gospel of Mary reveals quite a bit, including how in the Gospel it's saying that sin wasn't created by God. It was created by men, human beings who hold themselves to that kind of standard, and that we need to remove the idea of sin, or at least understand what sin truly is in order for us to move forward as a society and not restrict women in that way. And sort of make religion more feminist in nature or more spiritual in nature. And as this book comes to a close, Loehnen argues that we need to embrace our feminine side, not only for women, but also for men in order to break down the patriarchy and get rid of that sort of toxic masculinity mindset. In terms of analysis, there's a fair bit to talk about with On Our Best Behavior. One of the themes that pops up throughout the book is that of religion. Loehnen's writings touch upon Evagrius Ponticus's 7 deadly sins, or his original 9 sins, which one was removed, and the 2 of them were just sort of combined, so you end up with 7 deadly sins. So much of the story is enmeshed in that religion and how those sins kind of dictate how women should feel and their what's appropriate for women, and if you violate any of these sins, you're punished. But it's really interesting to see the role of religion in American life. We tend to think of religious people as minorities or something like that. But even though they might be a minority, like evangelicals in particular, they still have a very firm control of American society and can use it to punish women or anyone who doesn't abide by their strict moral code whenever they get the chance. So essentially what Loehnen is writing about is that religion like this, like these 7 deadly sins, are used to oppress women and make all sins seem feminine, whereas there's less pressure put on men, and just in general, women, men seem to have an easier go of it. But if they don't abide by any of this, again, they're also punished in the same way, sort of seen as less than, which isn't good. And she compares and contrasts this to like the Gospel of Mary in the story, something that is considered non-canon. And I think what Loehnen is saying is that it's non-canon because of what it's arguing, that Jesus never really talked about sinning or anything like that, or that sinning is sort of a human creation, and the implication there might be that it's meant to control people, because if you can say, oh, you're not getting into heaven because you're acting this sort of way, you can get people to stop acting like that. And again, as I mentioned before, like this is mainly aimed at women, but it's not much better for men, because if you don't behave in that traditional masculine way, if you show any signs of weakness, then it's you're criticized for it. Allow me to read you an interesting quote from this. Sadness is a gateway to feeling into life. It must be reclaimed from the idea that it is weak or womanly. Only when sadness is embodied can men access their tenderness, a fuller experience of love, a more complete expression of themselves. The health of our culture requires this submission. And it's a very interesting quote, because she's just noting that men can't access the full side of themselves, because in the case of the sin of sadness, men aren't allowed to connect to that. And so our culture's overall mental health, just health in general, is suffering as a result. And you can make an argument that this is purely religion right here, but there's a question that is the problem religion specifically, or is it something deeper? I do think that a religious institution that seeks to hide religious works because they don't abide by the canon can be a problem, but there's a deeper problem in that there's a system in place that's allowing all this to thrive, which in this case would be the patriarchal system in the United States and in many other countries. So it's not purely the fault of religion here. And as I just mentioned, another big theme that Elise is talking about is that of the patriarchy. It seems like all the problems that Loehnen notes are rooted somewhere in the patriarchy. That it's not merely a problem of religion, because if this was a problem of religion, then many cultures would have the same problems that the United States is experiencing. But a lot of those cultures, especially more progressive religions, don't really experience that kind of problem. As my friend Bevan noted, like Judaism isn't inherently a misogynist religion. It's just through the eyes of the Christian interpretation does it become does it become sort of biased and misogynistic? And even that's only through the lens of like evangelical religion, which is a movement that's pretty recent in America. But you see like the endless work for women done because men shouldn't be raising the kids or anything like that. The fatphobia, because women have to be skinny to be appealing towards men. Censoring your wants because you're viewed as less than if you ever talk about what you want as a woman, and mandatory modesty, because if a woman acknowledges what she's due, if she acknowledges that she is successful, it might make men feel inferior, and that woman has to be punished. And that's all an aspect of the patriarchy right there. And women get punished for violating the sins, as she describes in the Anne Hathaway story. Anne Hathaway is repeatedly asked the question of why do people hate you? And she had to apologize for even talking about the fact that she might have deserved an Oscar. There's like, why weren't you modest about it? And people proclaiming Jennifer Lawrence to be far greater because she was sort of modest in talking about everything and much more relatable or something like that. And again, men are also required to propagate this system, and not doing so is a act worthy of punishment too. And so ultimately, what I think Loehnen is getting at is there's a need for dismantling here. That there's a need to tear down this patriarchal system and replace it with something that's more productive, something that is more egalitarian. Otherwise, entire cultures are bound to suffer. You can't just keep going like this. Something will implode sooner or later. I also like how Elise notes that some of these sins pit women against other women, and that's a tool of the patriarchy. If women are busy fighting with each other, they can't really notice that the patriarchy is forcing them in that direction, sort of using them to propagate the system in place. And then also acknowledging the double standards that take place is always healthy. Loehnen's not the first person to talk about these double standards, but it is good to repeatedly recognize it because they exist and it's unfair for them to exist. I will say there are a couple problems with On Our Best Behavior here, and that one of them is that Loehnen is mostly reiterating established research in a sort of new mindset, framing this all under the umbrella of religion, which is an interesting way to sort of phrase this and view this, noting all of these sort of aspects of the patriarchy and how it affects women. But again, she's just reiterating research. It doesn't seem like she's done any of her own, so just saying what other people have said before, which Bevan and I have read a number of those for our book club, and it's fine, but again, if other people have said it, just direct me to those people. You don't need to just present their research and say, look what I created or something like that. There's a lot of other weird things. It does seem like Elise Loehnen is endorsing mediums in this particular book, kind of showing her weird sort of new age spiritualism in this book. And it's something that I don't really like because I especially believe that mediums sort of exploit people in times of sadness and whatnot, and for you to say, oh, mediums are great is kind of ignoring the fact that a lot of mediums are just BS and are trying to get money out of people rather than actually helping them come to terms with their grief. So just very weird that she brings that up. And then, as I mentioned before, she was like the co-founder of Goop with Gwyneth Paltrow. And Goop is an organization that a lot of people have criticized for being sort of a tool of the patriarchy, sort of being elitist in a way, and recommending solutions that are unhealthy and force unrealistic standards upon women. Now, Elise has gone away from Goop since then, which is great. Recognizing that it's not healthy and that you need to move on to something else in order to not propagate the patriarchal system that exists in the United States. However, she mentions none of that in this story. And it feels like that'd be something you would have to mention, that you were once part of the problem, and acknowledging that problem can be there and that we can all be unwitting, accomplices to the patriarchy in some way. I feel like that's very important, and Elise did not mention any of this. In fact, when I was looking up her biography, it was kind of like a jump scare, surprise, she worked for Goop. And I have a lot of problems with Goop. So for her to not acknowledge that at all really feels like she's trying to hide an aspect of her past, especially when she's so open to talking about who she knows and whatnot in this book. She's like, oh, I had the privilege of sitting down with X, Y, or Z, but she's not really talking about one aspect of her life, something that she was a major part of, and that feels like it's kind of hiding information that would be relevant. Now, it doesn't bring down or take away from anything that she's saying about the patriarchy, but it does feel like she's trying to hide her own complicitness in that, which is a problem for me. Anyway, those are my thoughts on Our Best Behavior by Elise Loehnen. It's a fine book. Again, it presents a lot of information that's already known and spoken about by a lot of better authors, including some that I've already talked about on this channel. So I'm not really sure what Elise Loehnen is really contributing to the conversation here, beyond framing it in the 7 Deadly Sins. It's still interesting to read. If you can find it at your local library, maybe check it out. But again, if you wanted to present a social justice book for others, there's probably better ones out there that you could find. So I'm going to have to say that this is probably one of the weaker recommendations that Bevan and I have read for our book club. But if you wanted to join it, let me know in the comments below, and we'll make you a part of it in some way. Would love to hear your thoughts and whatnot. But other than that, if you have anything to say about my review here or something to say about the patriarchy, let us know in the comments below. I would love to hear from you. Otherwise, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so that other people can find out about Elise or this book if they don't already know. And until then, I wish you the best of luck in your weird and patriarchal fighting travels. Farewell.